True Crime Corner. The regular who brings us all the true crime stories, Courtney, everyone.
Hi.
Yeah, hi, Courtney.
Hi.
Yeah. And maybe one of the luminaries in the world of true crime. Whose podcast dropped, and in the first hour, the new podcast, which is called
Mortal Sin.
Oh, yes. Mortal Sin dropped, and an hour later, it was the #1 podcast in America. Are you kidding? He's Josh Mankiewicz, everybody. Come on.
Come on.
I love it. So excited to have you here, Josh Mankiewicz. Let me finish.
I'm happy to
finish.
Yes.
Because we couldn't get Keith Morrison. Thank you, everyone.
Hey, come on now.
Can you let him finish, sir?
All right. So, Josh, you know you have a place of love here on this program.
That's how the DeSantis Newsom debate began, isn't it? Did Sean Hannity say that?
Yeah. Look, there's a lot of love around the holidays, and we want to reflect it back out to all of our listeners and viewers here on our program.
That's
Courtney
the biggest
here.
lie you have ever told.
How dare you?
That's a very steep hill to climb.
Really, you.
Yeah.
You are a cover-up artist, and you are a liar.
All right, Josh, tell us about, first of all, Courtney. Maybe you should ask Josh about his new podcast.
Oh, okay.
It's true crime, straight up true crime.
I mean, there's nothing I like to listen more to than true crime. I've listened to almost every Dateline podcast episode. But
his new podcast is a spin-off from Dateline. Yeah, exactly. And what is it, Josh? How does it differ from the normal Dateline thing? And then we'll get into why you're here today and the actual. You have a new true crime series of true crime stories, please. But go ahead.
Okay, I'm here today because the host begged me. So let's just skip that part.
How dare you? How dare you?
Yeah,
I beg no one.
Do you know who I am?
I mean, I don't need to
kind
beg
of a big
you.
deal.
I mean, I would go on the record that I'm here because of forced nature.
I really.
Yeah.
I will continue this conversation under protest.
Yeah, I feel like I should hold up the newspaper today, like a proof of life.
I get it, hostage thing. Yeah,
so,
I get it. Okay, all right.
Yeah, it's very funny. All right, so
that's not fake. That's real.
All right.
So the podcast is called Mortal Sin. This stems from a series. This stems from a story that we did back in the 90s. This happened in 1997. So I think we did this story in like 99 or 2000. And it's the story of a small church up in Washington, outside of Seattle, in Bremerton. And the very, very, very odd things that went on behind the walls of that church and among members of the congregation. And we're talking about betrayal, and we're talking about lying, and we're talking about adultery, and those are all things that happen in the world, whether you go to a house of worship or not. The difference was that all of this was sort of under the banner of religion, which was extremely odd, and for people in that church, extremely disheartening and abusive. And then it's also about murder, because this is Dateline. So,
sure. And so you're saying even within the construct of this church and this worship, something really nasty happened.
Oh yeah, and continued to happen.
And the church covered it up. Don't want to say.
I don't.
No, they didn't.
No, I don't think the church did cover it up. I think the church was incredibly slow to react to what was going on.
Was the church the backdrop for what happened, or was the church actually?
It was both the backdrop for what happened, and it was the thing that connects all the people in the story. They were all connected to that church in one way or another. This was an unusual church. You know what? Let me start off by saying, because I know your audience is going to care about this. This is called Mortal Sin, and the first 2 episodes are going to be available wherever you get your podcasts for free on December the 5th. and
Okay.
then the rest of them will drop over the next couple of weeks as 5 in all.
I think that
And-
when we just to be honest and fair as we typically are on this program,
Right. This will run
I
in
think
like a year.
this will run
Right.
probably
2000.
on the 8th, 9th. It may run around the 8, 9, 10, 11, like around the
2034.
12th. I think it'll run around the 12th of the month. So
All right. Good. Okay.
those 3 episodes will be out.
Yeah. All right.
And so
the
will
first.
the rest of it. Okay. Yeah.
All right. So
Wow,
so
that was a short
right.
explanation.
Yeah, that was good.
Wow. It's a very tough
So-
crowd. I mean, I can't.
You know, they do this to me all the time. I don't know what the hell
they
they
bring
do it
guests
for.
in and then they're all over me. It's crazy.
Yeah. Well,
All right, Josh,
anyways,
please continue. So you're saying the first 2 episodes are free, and then after that, you soak people for more.
No, all the episodes are free.
Great.
Okay. All the episodes are free. If you are a member of Dateline Premium, which let me just say you all should be, you can get the episodes earlier. You can get them without ads, which people do not want to listen to sometimes. And you can get a bunch of extras that a bunch of premium content that we offer to the premium customers, like different interviews and podcasts and other things that people want. But the big thing is that you get the original podcasts, the ones that are not just the audio of the show. Those Dateline showcasts, those do very well.
I see.
But those are available all the time. Courtney has listened to all of them.
Exactly.
These are original podcasts, which are just done as a podcast. Because when I did the interviews for this story back in the late 90s, early 2000s, I don't even think the word podcast existed. And we were doing it as a TV story. And, in a TV story at 38 minutes, if you take out, commercials and intros and things like that, there's a great deal that's left out of the story. So we told this story, and a lot has happened since then. So we told this story in a different way. And so this is the story of Christ Community Church, which was a small church in Bremerton, Washington, and it was an unusual church. First of all, when you joined, members have described going through this process in which they were required to tell all their secrets. And I'm talking about secrets that you, Mark and Courtney, might not even think of as a real secret. I mean, yes, they asked, have you ever had an abortion? Are you an alcoholic? You ever cheated on your husband or wife? But they also ask things like, have you ever lied about being sick so that you could go out and, buy Christmas presents or, just take a day off watching soaps? I mean, they asked about some things that I would regard, and most people would regard, as fairly minor transgressions, in addition to great big things. This was a charismatic church, which believed in things like prophecy and, in some cases, raising people from the dead. So all of disclosing those secrets as a way of getting in made it difficult for people who were thinking about getting out. Not to say there wasn't a huge exodus of people who wanted to get out. Most people seemed pretty happy. There were a number of different pastors at this church. One of them was the youth pastor. It was this guy, Nick Hackney, who was 27 at the time, and who definitely sort of had the gift of gab. He was in the podcast. You can hear some audio of him talking during a sermon, and he's pretty good. You can tell. Anyway, he had this thing.
I predict he's the guy who did it. Am I right?
I've really enjoyed being on here today, Mark, and I'm going to go. But the podcast is called Mortal Sin, and Courtney will take over.
Courtney, someone like that, when they come on, these young guys, youth pastor, he's trouble. Am I right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah.
Gift of gab. The minute Mankiewicz said gift of gab, I knew he's trouble.
You can't spell. You can't spell murder without the letters in gift of gab. I mean, you have to add some letters. But
on the qualities of a youth pastor, gift of gab might be low on that list.
Anyway,
Right.
Josh, please continue. I apologize.
So
Go ahead.
yes, it is Nick who is at the center of this story, and Nick had this tradition where he would go out hunting with his brother, I think, and other friends the day after Christmas. They would get up.
So he's
early.
acquainted with killing already, is what you're telling us. Just saying.
No, that's all right. It's fine. I'm not in the middle of telling a story. Go right ahead. So,
sorry, go ahead. So he's used to going out hunting with his brother.
Mike Lindell never does this when I'm on his podcast. He should have a podcast, actually.
I'm sure he will have one.
And it could be called Now I Lay Me Down to Sleep, or right? I mean,
that's
right?
excellent.
It would be right. It would be like
My Pillow
right.
guy. I get it. I think that's great.
Ooh, it's a wild idea, but it just might work.
So, anyway, so Nick and his friends and family go out on this hunting trip day after Christmas 1997. And when he comes back, his house has burned down, and his wife, who was asleep when he left, because it was like dawn, is dead. Dawn Hackney. And he is quite broken up about it. And, one of the interesting things, I'll tell you this right now, one of the interesting things about this story is how, you, Mark, I can call you Mark, right?
If you must.
All right. Mark and Courtney, you instantly assume that this is probably murder and he's the guy, right?
Yeah, that's exactly what I
assumed. Okay. This was 1997. It was before stories about clergy abuse were as common. I'm not saying the abuse wasn't common, but the Boston Globe series and a lot of the revelations about Catholic priests came
just
out
after that, I guess. Huh?
Not long after that. Some of them had already broken at that point, but it was not as widespread a thing. And I bring that up because the word of people of the cloth was, I think, worth more back then than it became later. And the idea that a priest or pastor or minister could commit a terrible crime was harder to believe, both in the public and in law enforcement. So Nick was never really any kind of suspect. In fact, there was a determination that early on by police and fire investigators and the pathologists that this was an accident. This appeared to be an accident. Wow. They were renovating their house, so they didn't have any heat. They were using a space heater. There was no question that all of that was true. And they had opened Christmas presents the night before. And the belief was that the wrapping paper had caught fire because of the space heater. And there were some propane tanks that Nick had stored in there. And the feeling was that one of those had leaked and contributed to the fire. Now, later, all of that would come under review.
I get it. Yeah, sure.
But at the time,
that does seem pretty clean. Yeah.
It seemed plausible to people, right, and they just moved on. But that's not really the story here.
That's what he does so well. What he just did right there,
I know,
Courtney.
I know.
But that's not really the story here. He does that
Or let's just say that's not only the story here, because
he really just is. He's got it, doesn't he? Yeah.
This is why go ahead. Yeah. This is why we're the #1 podcast in America.
Damn straight. Go ahead.
And I don't want to sound preachy here, but it's something other people might be able to learn from.
I was going to say.
What?
How dare you? Go ahead.
So, but it's really what happened next that forms the basis for this story, because if it were only Don Hackney's death and subsequent reinvestigation many years later, I don't think we'd be doing a podcast on it. What happened next is what's truly remarkable. The church rallied around Nick Hackney, who seemed to be broken young man who had lost his wife. He was 27 and she was about the same age. His wife was unusual because she had a job in a credit union. She was one of the few people who had a job, didn't have anything to do with the church. And she was the breadwinner. And he was very busy. Like, he was not home a lot of the time because he was ministering to other people in the flock. And he started doing marriage counseling, which is usually sort of outside the realm of a youth pastor. But he was so good in talking to people that I think the church elders thought, okay, he can do it. And also, I think, like, there was a need for that, and I think they didn't raise too many questions about it. So he was doing a bunch of things that weren't involved strictly in sort of being a youth pastor. And after Dawn died in this fire, the day after Christmas, the church kind of rallied around Nick and took care of him and, cooked for him and, felt he was clearly pretty crushed. And then Nick began using that sympathy as a way of having sex with a number of the women in the church. And he would say to them, this is God's plan. This is not my idea. This is God's plan. And
he was a reluctant participant to God's plan.
I'm just doing what the Almighty wants. Or as Sammy Davis Jr. used to refer to him, the cat upstairs. And astonishing. I mean, it seems very hard to believe, but it really worked.
Wow.
And there were women who sort of felt a combination of sympathy for him and a sense of obligation to the Word of God. And when he would say, and this is one of the things that came up during the stories of abuse in the Catholic Church, which is when you're talking to a priest, you're talking to God's representative.
Sure.
And, if some guy asks you to have sex, that's one thing. If it's God speaking through a priest, that's a little different. And that's one of the things that, victims in the church abuse scandals had to deal with. And that's something that people here had to deal with, which is, this wasn't just anybody asking them to have sex. This was their pastor, one of their pastors, and he was telling them, this is from God. God was his wingman. We say that in the podcast.
Do you really?
Yeah. And
that line made it through.
Oh yeah, totally, right through.
But this is interesting. You're making an important point, and of course, it's encased in that silvery voice that you have with the storytelling abilities that you marshal. And the point you're making is, and it's a broader point about church abuse, is that these guys were creatures of authority, that is to say, figures of authority, and beyond just just like a cop is a person like that, and a football coach is a person like that. There are all these people who are involved in abuse scandal. A doctor is someone like that. So this guy, there he is now, Nick, the youth pastor, is a person of authority. And when you add the divine authority, is your point that it sort of changes the arithmetic so that you have even more authority than you had before, and these women go for that, or succumb to that. I don't know if that
and an assumption that what you're saying is true, is correct, is proper, and doesn't just come from you. That's Nick. That's Nick at about the age that all this happened.
Wow. I was expecting kind of more of a Matt Gatesy looking guy, and this guy looks sort of boyish almost, doesn't he?
He was boyish. He was, I think, 27 or 28 when his wife died.
So in any case, he's out there rolling around with different people in the church saying this is what God wants. And,
each one of them thought that they were the only woman that he was rolling around with.
And this is when he was still married when he was rolling around, or not, Josh?
Well, this was immediately after his wife died, and everybody felt sympathy for him. Now,
I see. Okay.
I'm not going to go into the long list of characters that Nick ended up having sex with, although we do in the podcast. It will take a while to do, and it is hair raising because it's not just anybody. I will say that. And you know, these were in all cases women who had taken their marriage vows in front of the church and in front of God, and had, you know, said that forsaking all others part, and thought to themselves, apparently, and we speak with two of them, thought to themselves, well, I mean, I'm married and I'm not supposed to be with anybody else. On the other hand, you know, this is what God wants. So who am I to say no? And so they didn't say no.
Wow.
Then as time went on, some more things emerged. One of them was that each one of these women who thought they were alone in Nick's life as the woman that God was telling to have sex with their pastor discovered that they were not. There were other women, quite a few other women. Then it turned out that one of the women had been seeing Nick before his wife died. Now, regular viewers of Dateline will see that as a kind of signpost.
Yes.
So that was
and all of a sudden the spotlight of suspicion swings back around.
It is astonishing.
You can use that if you want to. That I guess you've already recorded it, but
no,
might be
we'll
good for another podcast. The spotlight of suspicion swings back around. Do you want to jot that down right now, or do you want to?
I'll just use that in next week's story.
Okay.
Good.
All right. Good. So I'm sorry, you were saying, so all of a sudden it became clear that he had been carrying on with this woman prior to his wife passing away.
one woman prior to that. Mm-hmm. And, you know, this is a number of years later. This is like 3 or 4 years later that all this starts to, and some of these women felt, again, like it's so easy to just like laugh at these women. And so like, what? You're shocked? What did you expect? You actually believe this guy when he said, it's God who wants you to have sex with me? This is part of God's new plan, which involves you and me going to bed? You fell for that? And now what? You're shocked that he's a liar? I mean, what is wrong with you? But like, you've got to remember this occurred, you know, if not within the walls of the church, within the sort of, you know, virtual walls of the church. And this was also at a time when my pastor might be lying to me to get sex out of me was not one of the automatic thoughts that people have, because that hadn't been in the newspaper nearly as much. And these were women who not just believed and trusted this guy, but believed and trusted in God and in that church.
Sure.
And so they went along, and then later felt horrifically betrayed when they realized that this was not God's plan. It was just Nick's plan.
Oh, that's good. I'll bet that line's in the podcast.
Oh, yeah. That's in it like 4 times. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So this is like, if this were Dateline, it would be after that, not God's plan. Would be Nick's plan. It would go, and you know, then they'd sweep to the commercial
restless leg syndrome. Yes.
Right. Exactly. Some spot for restless leg syndrome. Exactly. Look, we're making fun of it just because we're having fun with it, because you're such a good sport about it, but it does sound like a pretty riveting story. So he's holding up a standby. Let me, where's the, there it is. You can go ahead, hold it up again, Josh. Go ahead.
All right, here we go. This will be good. Okay. That is funny.
Yeah, that is funny.
That is funny.
There's nothing if not funny, you know.
I had that, made up at some considerable personal expense, like, you know, like $11. Oh, there's the artwork for the podcast. That's good.
Yeah, very well done.
I had that made up during pandemic when Mark and I and a number of other people would meet via Zoom because we could not go out and have dinner the way we usually do.
Yeah, what we used to do is a regular Zoom.
What is it for those of us that can't see it?
It's just a mortal sin. It's the he has the please stand by. It's a please stand by
from like 1950s TV.
Yeah, it's like it's what they used to use when Josh was growing up. When
I was going to say so when Mark was middle age.
Yeah, no, Mark.
Josh and I. For everybody who doesn't know, Josh and myself, we grew up together. Josh is considerably older than I am, but he does have an abiding interest in helping and mentoring those behind. And I was one of them, and then a friendship grew up. So it's really quite lovely that he is.
That is quite a good story.
Yeah, it's true, Josh. It's true, and we're so excited for your.
Let's absolutely go with that. I like that. The mentor element is new today. I like that.
Mm-hmm.
That's good.
There you are.
That's good. All right.
So that's what's happening with that. We hope that Mortal Sin is a big success for you and all the. It clearly is already. It's the #1 podcast in America right now.
And by the way, let me just say this. This podcast was released on a Tuesday, and by sometime on Wednesday, it was literally #1 on Apple, ahead of Joe Rogan and the New York Times Daily and that new podcast by Rob Reiner about JFK, which is very good.
Oh, is it really? I've got to check it out then. Okay.
Yeah. And he's going to reveal who he thinks are the killers. He hasn't done it yet. He's going to.
Let me guess. He'll do it in the last episode. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the way to do it. That's that's how we do it. I mean,
you guys. I mean, well, you do it and you don't. I mean, in this case, I think.
Well, I'm giving away stuff in this interview with you that we don't give away in the podcast until like part 4 or 5.
Okay, 4 or 5 though isn't the end. How many episodes is Mortal Sin?
30. Just kidding. It's 5. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Well, then you do. Then it is the last episode.
Yeah.
Wow. You need to mentor him a little more.
Yeah.
I know, right? I should have mentored him a little harder.
We could try ignoring it, sir.
All right.
All right, so let me just get to the end of this because, you're gonna want to listen to this podcast.
It turns out that it was the Lord's plan, and the Lord did actually really ask the. No, that's not the Lord's plan.
Right, and then they all, you just all need a bigger bed. So
this is a word from the Lord, and He's not happy.
Okay.
Yeah. Well,
it turns out the Lord's not happy. And what happens with this? Well, tell us what you can, what you feel comfortable telling us.
Hold on 1 second, because the guy who cuts my hair wants to know what time.
Wow, this has never happened with a guest on this show.
Yeah, this is
a little
what
interruption
happens.
to chat with the.
You talk about mentoring. This is what happens. All right,
Courtney. So far, do you have any reaction to Mr. Mankiewicz's new podcast and this story? Are you familiar with it?
I'm not.
There's
familiar
his
with
wife,
story, but
the wife that was
excited.
killed.
I mean, I'm familiar with
these
kinds of stories.
Yes.
You hear.
Well, so let me just get
to
the end here. So first, the one of the things that people in this church believed in was the power of prophecy, and there was a woman who was like the church secretary, but she was also a prophetess, and she would say things, and they would be accepted as being legitimate. That's her, Sandy Glass, as being legitimate prophecies that held the power of the Almighty, and that she had this ability to sort of see into the future, and that would become a very significant part of the story as this all went forward.
Well, I don't know. This is probably a question that not anyone's asked, but did she have the ability to see in the future? Did you guys consider that?
Who is to say?
All right. She's very attractive. That's not a great picture of her, but she looks very attractive, the church secretary, Sandy Glass.
Yeah. Well,
does she die in this story, or does she survive and then her prophecies maybe come to pass?
Sandy Glass is
one
still
of his
alive.
victims. She's still alive. All right. I love that. All right. Okay. So this is good. So there's some unexpected stuff here. I like this. So anyway,
there is.
Continue. So she's a prophetess, but her prophecies ended up
being of some significant moment in this story.
Oh, wow. This is intriguing, Courtney.
Yeah.
This is intriguing.
I know.
And so this is not just the story of Don Hackney's death, and it's not just the story of Nick Hackney's philandering, and it's not just the story of one man's lying about what God wanted to further his own ambitions and aims and sort of lustful intentions. It's also the story of how sort of all that lying and all that betrayal wrecked this church and did significant damage to some people's lives. And these are people who were not, in any way involved in anything criminal. So this is both a story of criminal wrongdoing and of moral wrongdoing and of, just wrongdoing in the case of, what's right and wrong, even if you don't believe in any God. Some of the behavior here is very shocking and very disappointing.
Wow. It does seem intriguing.
Yeah.
And I have to say to all of the true crime enthusiasts, Courtney, perhaps you lead among them. This is really going to be great. But to even someone like myself, who doesn't really have an abiding interest in true crime and who doesn't have any personal positive regard for Josh Mankiewicz, I still think I will listen. I'm looking forward to this. Mortal Sin. Yeah.
Yeah.
Josh Mankiewicz's new podcast.
Available wherever you get your podcast. There on your screen.
Dateline people.
Yeah, so you look up Dateline, you will find Mortal Sin. If you look up podcast,
apparently it must be pretty easy to find. You're number one podcast in America, so I got to figure
they're not having any trouble finding it. I like the artwork. It looks like stained glass, which I think
exactly
is
looks very churchy. Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.